I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and we're speaking with Congressman Jamie Raskin about the imperative of doing what's right, even in the most difficult of times and circumstances.
So this week we celebrated our first Independence Day after a constitutional right had been stripped from the American people. The MAGA physical assaults and the GOP legislative assaults on our democracy are also attacks on all of our individual rights and freedoms. So the question is, will Americans recognize that in time and rise together to meet this historic and really fragile moment for our democracy?
Which is why I'm incredibly excited that we have former constitutional law professor and current Congressman Jamie Raskin. He was the lead impeachment manager for Trump's second impeachment, is a member of the January 6th committee, and is the author of New York Times best-selling book, Unthinkable: Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. Welcome to We're Speaking. Hello, Congressman.
Delighted to be with you guys. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have you here. So thank you very much for carving out the time. We know that you are a busy, busy man.
Yeah.
So we're going to start it out with, some light conversation. Should we prosecute Trump for the failed coup attempt? Is that really what's best for the country? There seems to be this real debate about is that what divides us further, or is that what needs to happen to have real accountability? You seem to come down on the side of, yes, we need to prosecute if that's where the evidence takes us.
Well, I think that's well put. I mean, I certainly come down on the side of individual criminal accountability for people who commit offenses, especially serious offenses against the union, against the people. One of the nice things about the separation of powers is that as a member of the legislative branch, I don't have to pronounce on this. One of the great traditions embedded in America's history that Donald Trump trashed was the idea that the political branches don't opine, much less try to micromanage what the law enforcement function does. Before Trump, people would have thought it astonishing to have a president saying, prosecute that person, jail that person, leave my friend alone. And somehow we got conditioned to that. So I'm trying to go back towards the idea that certainly if we have evidence of crimes, if we have evidence of people engaging in contempt of Congress, we turn it over to the Department of Justice and we expect the wheels of justice to turn. But we don't harangue them, we don't heckle them, we don't pressure them, we don't lobby them. And I'd kind of like to get back to that. The House Resolution 503, which created our select committee, is asking for a report to the American people about what happened on January 6th and what were the causes, and what do we need to do going forward to fortify ourselves against coups, insurrections, political violence, and attempts to hijack the election process.
So that's great, because accountability is key, assessing what we need to do for the future. And the American people are watching and want that accountability. But we're also experiencing trauma after trauma. What is your strategy for getting Americans to kind of push through this without checking out?
Well, that's a great question that we got to think about at a lot of different levels, Maya. My dad always used to tell us when we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you are the hope. And we have to take responsibility ourselves for giving hope to especially people who are in even a more dire circumstance than we are. There are people suffering every day from gun violence. Our brothers and sisters in Ukraine are under the jackboot of Putin's tyrannical invasion and imperialism. So all of us have to try to find, within ourselves, reservoirs of resiliency and toughness, but we got to do it together. When people tell me they're burning out, then I say, well, then you're doing this the wrong way. You're doing this on your own. And this is a collective enterprise, saving democracy, saving our freedom from a rampaging Supreme Court, like a rampaging mob, like a rampaging party. Like that's a group effort. Nobody's going to be able to do it on his or her own. And if you need to take a few days off, take a few days off, Lisa and Maya. I'll have your back. And then when I get to take a few days off, you'll have my back, right?
I love it.
We're in it together.
Team effort.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the American people's attention and focus and sort of heads in the right place seems like a really challenging thing to do. When you were one of the impeachment managers, that was a really different role because you were trying to get the Senate to actually do something. And to some degree, where the American people were could influence that. But now you really are speaking to the American people from the committee. How are you approaching that differently so that what you're trying to get across really resonates in a way that people are going to take it on and become part of that group of people having each other's backs?
Yeah, it's a great question because, when we tried Donald Trump for inciting insurrection against the Union, we basically had our sights set on one guy, Donald Trump, and one constitutional crime, inciting insurrection. The January 6th Select Committee has a far broader purview. It's not just what did he do, it's what happened and what were all of the forces involved, what were all of the crimes committed. I think that in both cases, we have had to try to condense a huge constellation of facts down to a coherent, comprehensible story that makes sense to people. I think that the American public gets the idea now that Donald Trump would not take no for an answer from the American people, despite the fact that more than 7 million more Americans voted for Biden than Trump, and Biden beat him 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, which was the same margin that Trump had beat Hillary by, which he had pronounced a landslide when he was on the winning side of that margin, not so much when he was on the losing side of it. But he proceeded to try to orchestrate a coup against the election to overturn the process. I mean, the first thing they did was bring lawsuits, which they had every right to do, although they were utterly devoid of content and they were frivolous, and he lost more than 60 of them. That's what gives us the comprehensive, detailed record refuting every claim of electoral fraud and corruption. But then they proceeded to try to coerce state legislatures into nullifying the popular vote and just appointing electors for Trump, going to the election officials like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia and saying, just find me 11,780 votes. In other words, just commit election fraud, which is what's being investigated down there in Georgia now, to going to the Department of Justice saying, we need you to get involved in this to call out the corruption and the fraud. And, William Barr, of all people, the biggest Trump sycophant of all time, comes back and says, it's bullshit. There's nothing there, So we've been able to take people through every effort by Trump to do it. And where we're headed, over the next couple of weeks is to show how the end of the story is to try to coerce Pence to step outside of his constitutional role to declare unprecedented, lawless powers to reject electoral college votes from Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, a handful of other states, thereby either just giving Trump the election or forcing all of it into the House for a so-called contingent election, but using domestic violent extremist groups to storm the Capitol, smash our windows, tear down the doors, beat the hell out of our officers, and then a mass mob that has been formed online to back them up and to take those bloody instructions from the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the other extremist groups to attack our officers and to rampage against democracy. So it's an extraordinary story. It is the most devastating political crime ever committed by a president of the United States. And it happened, less than 2 years ago.
Yeah, the facts are overwhelming, they're damning, and what really sticks out to me in this story are the people. Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, like coming out as somebody who is, formerly really a confidant on that side. Has her courage moved the needle in this story? Like, has that pushed more people to pay attention and say, okay, this is something that we do need to take seriously and we will come forward?
Well, I think so. I mean, she's an utterly credible, believable witness who has no incentive to lie, no motive to lie, and evinces, no signs of lying, unlike, Giuliani, for example, or Donald Trump, where it seems like every other statement they make is a lie, and all of it flows out of the big lie. And what's remarkable to me is how many people, sometimes our friends across the aisle will say, this is a totally partisan exercise. And I say, you know what, you're right. It is totally partisan because all of our witnesses are Republicans. So, everybody who's blowing the whistle on what your guy did is a Republican. Secretary of State Ravensburger was a big time Trump supporter who gave Trump tons of money. Some of these witnesses are saying they still are Republicans, even after all of this, but they are unwilling to lie for a politician, for Donald Trump. And so we have a very clear record now. It's amazing to me the way they turn on their own friends, the way that Donald Trump turned on Michael Cohen, who was his own personal lawyer for all those years. And then the minute that they come out and decide to start telling the truth, well, then that person can't be trusted. They're a liar, they're a cheat, and so on. They're talking about their best friends who, just can't take it anymore and are saying, I've got to tell the truth about this situation. And that speaks well, ultimately, for democracy, because people can get suckered for a while, but eventually the people wake up, the public is going to wake up. And I believe we're really hitting a tipping point now in terms of public understanding of what Donald Trump just did.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. I have to tell you, I so appreciated you essentially telling people who, after Cassie.
Oh, it looks like we lost Lisa for a little bit, so we'll get to her appreciation shortly. I do want to say, like, the candor of all of this is making it possible for people to see the truth, because we've talked about that before, about this, the truth being obscured and what are facts. And these facts matter because the midterms are coming up. And everybody's nervous, and we've seen these broad coalitions starting to form, like Democrats in Utah are backing an independent. We're seeing Republicans backing Democrats in other races to try to knock out MAGA candidates. And LP, it's a group of mostly former Republicans. I myself am a Democrat, but it's kind of like this broad coalition. Do you feel like this is the moment where people are starting to come together and form these coalitions around democracy?
I hope so, because this moment is so much bigger than any particular political party or any politician or anybody's ambition. I mean, it's really about the survival of constitutional democracy. I mean, what all authoritarian and fascist parties have in common is, one, they reject the results of democratic elections that don't go their way. And two, they embrace political violence, or at least they won't renounce it. And so we can see what's happening to Lincoln's party, which alas has been turned into the authoritarian cult of personality of Donald Trump.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have been reading a lot about fascism and seeing that is the result of where things are going, and it's completely it's mind-boggling. And so I'm glad that people are finally working together. Lisa, we lost you at appreciation. I'd love for you to pick back up.
I still got to watch the show, even though I dropped out. I could see and hear both of you, so that was great. I normally don't get to sit back and enjoy the conversation. No, I was going to say I really appreciate that you essentially told people to put up or shut up who were had a lot to say without being willing to go under oath about what Cassidy Hutchinson had said. And it's been so frustrating that there are the people who are willing to go under oath, and I do have to say there seem to be an awful lot of women who have been willing to step forward and take on these roles all the way back to the first impeachment. We saw some pretty impressive women whose male bosses held it for the books. But we now have, I'm not saying this is what Pat Cipollone did, but I'm glad to see that he's responding to the subpoena that you folks issued. I understand we're going to hear from him next Tuesday.
But I'm not sure we've made any announcement about that, so I don't know.
So the leak might not have been accurate.
So we'll all be on pins and needles, which I think is for a lot of us. It's great because it is building that tension where people are paying attention. And so I know myself.
It's been another one of those cases where you have had a lower level person have this huge responsibility placed on their shoulders to stand up and do the right thing, while people in position of power have stayed in much more comfortable situations. Is there a way to push more of these folks to do the right thing at this point, or are they pretty comfortable where they are?
Well, it is a good argument for generational politics, for a turnover, as Jefferson would have it. I mean, it seems like some people are so deeply ensconced in power and in corrupt networks that they're willing to say and do anything. They're willing to, lie all the way to the end of this totally sordid, corrupt process that Donald Trump has gotten people in. But a lot of the younger people, regardless of political party, and Cassidy Hutchinson is a great example, have kept their ethics intact. I mean, my kids have said, what was she doing with Donald Trump in the first place? But that's a different question, okay? Because, there are people who could be supporting Donald Trump who still believe in the constitutional infrastructure of the country and are not willing to just blow the whole thing up. And so, I was very grateful to see what Cassidy Hutchinson did, and I'll be interested to see how her moral and political ideas evolve in her life.
And I definitely want to talk about the Constitution with you. But since we're already on the topic of the youth, Gen Z, to quote one of my favorite poets, Whitney Houston, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Based on your Democracy Summer program, it feels like you feel the same way. What inspires you in particular about this generation and their call to action right now?
I think it's a remarkable generation. I mean, they've gotten beyond so many of the pathologies that have tied the country up in knots before. I mean, they're beyond the racism and the misogyny and the anti-Semitism and the immigrant bashing and the homophobia. They're also a little bit beyond grammar, too, and that's another problem. That might have something to do with growing up on tweets and texts and so on. I am working with them on their writing, but people's relationship to writing and reading changes over time. I understand that, but in any event, I think that their values are really solid. I do challenge them on political correctness. I say, let's replace PC political correctness with PC political courage. Go out and talk to some people you don't know, who didn't have the advantage and the benefit of the education you got, who might not know all of the grooviest new words, but may have a lot to say and a lot to contribute to the time we're in. So I think that we could do without some of that political correctness, which I view as a hangover from New England Puritanism from the 17th century. The idea that there's a group of people who have all the right words and all the right ideas, and they live perfectly, and everybody's got to emulate them and be afraid of them. I mean, we don't need that. That's very different from real progressivism and the idea that we're all in this together in democracy and we can grow together.
One of the things. I have sons who are in their early 20s, and so we have a lot of conversations about what rights are being rolled back right now. And it seems like one of the messages we really need to get across to kids is that what the Supreme Court's going after, what these states are going after, like Texas and Florida and so many others right now, the things they don't like describe this next generation, all the things that you just listed off, Congressman, that this next generation is beyond, are the things that the people currently with a lot of levers of power at the state level and the Supreme Court seem to want to be able to crush. So, question on the Supreme Court, what do we do?
Well, let me invoke your namesake, Abraham Lincoln, whose bust I have on my desk in the Rayburn House Office Building. You know, Lincoln, somebody asked him what was the relationship between the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He said, well, the Constitution is like the silver frame, the silver platter, but on it sits the apple of gold, which is freedom. And freedom is the promise of the Declaration. And today, democracy and freedom both are under attack, but people have got to understand that the attack on voting rights and the voter suppression statutes and the gerrymandering and the filibuster and all of these procedural mechanisms ultimately are going to add up to an assault on people's freedom. And that's what we're living through with the attack on, the reproductive rights of women, which is the product of the gerrymandering of the Supreme Court by, what I call a rule or ruin party. I mean, that's really what under Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump it's become. Either they're going to rule and they're going to control everything and everybody, or they're going to ruin our opportunity to make any progress, which is a profoundly unpatriotic way of thinking about government.
Absolutely. And without progress, we kind of have stagnation. And for, I have a 14-year-old and all she's ever known is freedom and democracy. And so this idea that it could just slip away is something that she's only just now waking up to. When we talk about the Supreme Court, Moore v. Harper is now on the docket. Can you talk about that? What can the average citizen do to mitigate what might be the possible effects of this?
Yes, well, I mean, it's a nightmarish possibility. Thank you for raising it, Maya. And I'm cheered by the fact that people are paying close attention. This independent state legislature doctrine basically is an attempt to vest all power in the state legislatures over what happens in any election, whether it's a congressional election or state elections or a presidential election. Essentially, it's attempting to do through this constitutional reinterpretation what Donald Trump was trying to do in 2020, which is to vest all the power in the state legislatures to appoint electors and disregard what the people are voting on. So it is a very severe assault on democracy. And we do have to start getting ready for that now. I have felt for a long time that the Electoral College is a threat to democracy. It's obviously fundamentally undemocratic because the popular vote loser has won the election 5 different times, twice in this century alone, 2000 and 2016. And the vast majority of people, because they live in red states or blue states, are marginalized in the general election, which means all of the attention goes to a handful of states, which we know, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, but most people live in other states and they're ignored. But now we know also the Electoral College has become a danger to us because there's so many nooks and crannies in this antiquated system that if you've got a strategic bad faith actor like Donald Trump, they can plant booby traps. I mean, people are getting killed now in the crevices of the Electoral College, like on January 6th. So we should be electing the president the way we elect governors and senators and mayors and everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. And that's what the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is about. I was proud that that was the first bill I introduced as a state senator. back in 2007 when I got elected, and Maryland became the first state to adopt it. And now we're more than halfway there. So people should definitely get behind the national popular vote interstate compact. But we've got to do what we can, even within the electoral college system, to try to protect ourselves. And I hope coming out of the January 6th committee process and the hearings and the report, we'll be able to suggest some reforms that will try to stabilize and insulate the system against these sorts of attacks.
The report that the committee is going to come out with and the recommendations that I'm sure you have been formulating for quite a length of time now in the work that you've been doing, do you fill us with hope? Is there a chance that reform recommendations can actually move forward and be instituted because they're going to need bipartisan support? Is there the bipartisan will to reform if that means possibly taking some of the power away that the GOP has been able to finagle?
Yeah. I mean, well, this is why I call upon, all my Republican friends and independent friends and people across the spectrum to put pressure on the Republican Party, regardless of where you are on this or that issue. But we've got to have a fundamental agreement in a constitutional democracy that everybody will abide by the real results of elections and not try to put the fix in. We see this happening now around the world. I mean, that's what's going on in Hungary with, illiberal democracy. The idea that one party can get in and then entrench itself in the institutions, wage a war on, the way that Steve Bannon wanted to wage a war on the administrative state, which is really what we depend on to enforce the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And I mean, those are administrative agencies that do it. It's not members of Congress or the president who runs out there to enforce the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act or take care of national parks. It's a real government. In a democracy, the government is us. So we got to stand up for the government. And these people, by the way, they're not anarchists. They don't want to get rid of all government. They certainly want the government in that's going to make them rich, because Donald Trump had a very big money-making operation going on when he was inside the government, and they don't mind the military and the national security state, which they can use for all their friends who are the dictators and autocrats and bullies of other people's countries. So, if you're an anarchist, you should not be interested in what they're doing. But all of us should be interested in real freedom and real democracy. And that means a government that works for the people. That's got to be our watchword, a government that is an instrument of the common good, the public interest of everybody.
Absolutely. And just one last question before you go. I want to bring it back to Democracy Summer and then what you said about hope, that when things look hopeless, that we are the hope.
Yes.
Well, I would love for you to wrap on that.
You're kind to ask about it. So Democracy Summer is our project. Now we have, I think, 800 young people across the country, college kids, high school kids, young people taking time off or doing other jobs, who are learning about the history of social change in America and the democratic movements that have opposed odds at least as bad as the odds we've got today. The people who took on slavery, the people who took on the disenfranchisement of women, the people who took on the Dixiecrats and the racists and the sheriffs and the German shepherds in the South to establish the right to vote in the 1960s, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the young people who have fought for environmental change and the LGBTQ movement, the civilizing movements of our time. We want the young people to understand they are heirs to a precious, amazing legacy in this country. And that legacy continues with the struggle that we're in today to defend democracy, not just here, but all over the world, because all of the autocrats and the dictators have found each other from Moscow to Mar-a-Lago, right? I mean, we've got Orban in Hungary, and we've got Marcos in the Philippines, and El-Sisi in Egypt, and Putin in Russia, and Xi in China. They're all betting on the failure of American democracy. And we have got to demonstrate how tough and how resilient we are. And they should not confuse people who are nice and kind and good with people who are weak, because we're not weak in any way. We're tough as hell. and we're strong as hell, and we're going to expose all of the authoritarianism and the corruption on the Trump side of the equation, and we're going to keep moving democracy forward. Tocqueville said that in democracy, in American democracy, that voting rights and people power is either shrinking or it's growing or expanding, and we've got to get back on the growth track. And that means statehood for people in Washington, D.C., who are the only residents of a capital city on earth who are disenfranchised. It means statehood for people in Puerto Rico. It means moving democracy forward instead of lapsing into an authoritarian regime.
I am fired up. I'm like democracy summer for the youth, but also for the adults now. I'm like, let's everybody on board.
Yeah, there are a lot of adults who could use a democracy summer right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Raskin.
Yes, thank you so much. It is the summer for it. Thank you so much for being here. We will be watching and following and engaging. So we are grateful, so very grateful for the work that we are doing. So like, get out there, do it.
Thank you for everything so much you're doing.
Keep up.
He was going to say, keep up the good work. And I will say, yes, we will. Everybody, keep up the good work. I am fired up after that. I feel like we need a theme song for Democracy Summer. I want everybody out there, because honestly, it's exactly as he says it. It's exactly as the congressman puts it, is that right now we have authoritarianism encroaching all over the world, and all eyes are on us to basically believe in democracy again. Like, none of this cynicism. I'm done with the cynicism. We have to believe, we have to have hope, we have to do the work. And it is a group effort. If we're feeling exhausted, that's because, as he pointed out, we're not relying on each other and working with each other to move forward. So Lisa, I'm feeling good. I'm fired up. Are you fired up?
We're not recognizing our own power. And that's one of the things that I always love about listening to Congressman Raskin talk, is that he reminds all of us we have individual and we have collective power. And we have a tendency to get overwhelmed and cede that power and think that we can't do these things. But to get that historical perspective of all the things that this country has overcome, and it's overcome because it came from the ground up. It was the people doing it. We weren't waiting for the government to figure this out and hand our freedoms down to us. It was all of us getting off our asses, working hard together, and demanding that we have the rights and opportunities that everybody should be entitled to and given in a functioning democracy. That's why we're here.
It's why we're here.
Yeah. So, God, I'm so thrilled that we had the opportunity to talk with him. What an absolute treat. Tomorrow, as always on Thursdays, there's the absolute treat of being able to tune into the breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. So definitely do not miss the two of them, as always.
Yes, and then we will see you next time.